Pete was a wee little guy, and a wee little guy was Pete. Pete was my next door neighbor on the 4th floor of McMurray Hall my senior year of college on the honors floor. We had private rooms on that floor. And Pete was what we call the RA, the resident assistant, which means he had a certain amount of authority. And if you needed something done or you had a problem, something was wrong in your room, if you need something fixed, or if you needed to just report some trouble, you go find Pete on our floor. I was not close friends with Pete. We didn't run in the same social circles. He was a business major. He was a member of a fraternity, and they did whatever they did together. And I was on the basketball team, and I traveled a lot and was gone for days at a time on the road. So we kind of went different directions, but I'd seen Pete around campus, and he was a pretty nice guy. So the first week of school, when I got to my room and saw that he was my next door neighbor, I extended a gracious offer to him, and I said, "Pete, if there's anything that I can ever do to help you, you just let me know." And I told him that several times the first week or two or month of school. When I'd see him around, I extend that offer to him. "Pete, if there's anything you ever need, you just let me know." I don't know that he ever took me too seriously. He never came to me and asked for help, but that may have been normal because we weren't the closest of friends and we didn't spend a lot of time together. But I happened to run into Pete one Saturday night in January 1988. I walked into the front doors, into the lobby of McMurray Hall, and there was Pete in a confrontation with a defensive back from the football team. His name was Jason. And Jason had decided that it was a good idea to have some alcohol in the dorm that night and have a big time with his buddies, and he got caught, and Pete's the one that caught him. Pete was talking with Jason, and Pete seemed to have control of the conversation. He was letting Jason know in no uncertain terms that he was in big trouble. And Pete said, "I'm going to have to write you up. Can't have alcohol in the dorm. Going to have to make this report to the administration." And Jason's tone was almost that of anywhere from apologetic to begging. He would say things like, "Come on, Pete, give me a break. Cut me some slack. I don't need this kind of trouble. I could lose my scholarship. Can't you let this one slide?" Finally, Pete, he got tired listening to that. He says, "You know, Jason, I'm busy. I need to go to my room and you need to go to yours." And so they both did. Now, I followed up behind Pete to the 4th floor. I got to my room just after he did. I was in my room. Pete was in his room. It just so happened that Jason lived on the floor right below us, the 3rd floor. And we could hear a lot of activity coming from his room. I could hear it, and I knew that Pete could hear it. There was a lot of profanity going on, and Jason was obviously mad at Pete. It sounded to me like that the alcohol activities were continuing with some of his buddies. And as the evening grew on, there was some shouting, some screaming, some profanities shouted in the direction referencing Pete's name. I was kind of concerned about that because I kind of thought it was escalating, and I sure didn't want Jason to come after Pete because Pete was a wee little guy and Jason wasn't. Unfortunately, I was right about that escalation. Later that night, 12 o'clock, I heard a noise out in the hall. Jason had made his way up to our floor, and he wanted to see Pete. And he confronted Pete, and the conversation took on a different tone this time. Jason was in control. Jason was angry. Jason was intoxicated. And all of that's a bad combination. But he was shouting profanities, making threats against Pete, occasionally banging his fist on the wall. And I didn't hear anything out of Pete. And I had a notion that maybe he was scared because of his size. So I went to the door, and as I opened that old dormitory door, it squeaked open. And they both looked at me. I said, "What's going on out here, gentlemen?" I was quite a bit bigger than Jason. Jason started to plead his case to me. And before he could get anything out of his mouth, I said, "You need to hit the road. I'm not really interested in listening to you in the middle of the night trying to get out of trouble or get into trouble while I'm trying to sleep. Just hit the road." And he had a bewildered look on his face, kind of a lost look. I've seen that before in the dorm. You've been around people who drink too much. You've seen that look. And I know, I've been around long enough to know that you can't really reason with somebody in that condition. Well, he started to plead his case again. I said, "Hit the road right now. Get out of here." And he left. Pete went back in his room, and I went back in my room. It wasn't 2 or 3 minutes later that Pete came in, knocked on the door, and I said, "Come in." Pete came in my room, and I could see that he was visibly, physically shaken. And he tried to say, "Thank you, Phil," but he could hardly say it without his voice wavering and fighting back the tears. And then I remember his exact words. He said, "I was way in over my head, and there was nothing I could do to handle that situation. I just wanted to thank you for helping out." And I said, "Pete, I told you, if there's ever anything that I can do to help, you just let me know." Well, he went back to his room. And I don't think those words had ever meant much to him before that night. They didn't carry power. There wasn't any emphasis. The meaning wasn't there. He didn't know what those words were capable of in his life. And he did not take advantage of my gracious offer. I think that's what people all over the world have been doing for decades, hundreds of years, a couple thousands of years. Jesus has extended this gracious offer to us. It's a gracious offer of help. And in his way, you know, if I could interpret it, he's saying, if there's anything that I can do to help you, just let me know. Call on my name. I am here. Now, to put it maybe in Jesus' words, Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30, I believe. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle, and I am humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He's been saying that for hundreds of years, centuries. Some people realize who's saying that. Well, who is saying that? It's God among us. It's Emmanuel, God among us. We know that's who it is. It's the words of that man. Matthew chapter 1, verse 22 says this, "All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. When we hear the words of Jesus, we need to understand that that's God talking and he's with us. He told us in John, when he was talking to his disciples, John chapters 14 through 16, he said, you know, I've got to leave, and I have to leave, and when I leave, there's going to be this special helper that comes, which I guess another way of looking at that would be another version of God. But he told us that, and we are to take advantage of it. Some people don't. Some people don't. But the Christians know when we're confronted with God, we make that decision. And our job, I guess, is to help the people understand the power and the impact, what those words really mean. In Luke chapter 19, Zacchaeus was confronted with that situation. Luke chapter 19, starting with verse 1, that's the story of Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus, it says Zacchaeus wanted to see who this Jesus was. doesn't tell us a lot about Zacchaeus' knowledge of the Savior, of God. We don't know if Zacchaeus knew about Jesus and healing the blind beggar, or raising Lazarus from the dead, or turning the water into wine. We don't know what Zacchaeus knew about Jesus, but he went to see who he was. And so Zacchaeus, now he was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree to see what he could see. And what he saw was Jesus. He saw Immanuel, God, with us from that tree. And interestingly enough, Jesus saw him. And he saw his need. And he said to Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. And boy, those words at that point, for some reason, meant something to Zacchaeus. Now, there were people standing around there that questioned what was going on. How could the Savior be hanging out with this yahoo of a sinner, tax collector? What's going on? What's the deal here? Maybe that's part of the impact that it had on Zacchaeus, that this holy man, God with us, would choose to spend a day with a man like him. But he was taken with that, and he understood the power of those words, and he took advantage of it. And his response was, you know what? I'm going to give half of everything I make to the poor. And he went so far as to say, whatever I've stolen from people in the past, I'm going to pay them back 4 times what I stole. That's quite a response from a man who, I guess, didn't know a lot about Jesus, certainly hadn't been living his life in the fashion that Jesus' words had power and they meant something. But there was a change, and there was an immediate response. That's what happened to Zacchaeus when he was confronted with God with us. So I guess the question for us today is, have we responded to that or not? Do we understand the implications of Immanuel, God with us, or not? I think some of us have. That's why you're here today, to worship this Savior, this God among us. But there are a lot of people who don't understand the implications of that. And I think it's our job to help them understand that in a variety of different ways to do that. But today is the day that they need to respond. And today is the day that we need to respond to this notion of God with us. And go out and find those people and help them understand what Jesus can do for them and mean in their lives. You know that there's nothing that you can do about your sin. There's nothing that you can do once you've sinned to get rid of your sin. And you know, that's why you're here today, that only Jesus can take care of that. There's nothing that we can do to handle that sin. And the world needs to know that there's nothing they can do to handle that sin unless they come to Jesus, Immanuel, God with us.